Diane. I've got 747s to Miami. Fly me.
I'm Terry. I've got great connections in Miami, all over the Sunshine States of America. Me.
I'm Marisa. I've got nonstop flights to Miami every day. Me.
Not too long ago, most airlines only hired attractive women with certain physical characteristics. The airlines argued that this is part of the qualification for the job. Our job is to maximize profits, and we make more money if we have women flight attendants. They called them stewardesses. Would you say, back in the day when the airlines made this argument, that being a physically attractive woman was a relevant qualification for being a flight attendant?
I think that you cannot deem somebody to be more qualified as an airline attendant based on what they look like.
So there should or should not be a law against airlines
There should be a law against airlines.
Against that?
Yeah.
Even if the airline, in its judgment, says, we will make more money this way.
Yes, because it's also about some kind of consumer sovereignty of saying, well, if I'm a woman, I should be able to look at attractive men. I mean,
I feel like here with the flight attendant case, it's clear-cut age discrimination. I mean, what happened over time is that the same flight attendants began getting fired because they got too old for the job, and that's clearly not okay, and that's already in our existing set of laws. We cannot discriminate based on age, which is linked to physical attraction, some say, so I completely agree with you.
And you agree that the airlines should not be able to fire a flight attendant based on age?
Right, I think there should be a law against
discrimination. And why should there be a law against age discrimination?
Because there's a huge set of negative externalities that come with that, and propagating those into our society, I think, is wrong. And I don't think
bad attitudes?
Yes.
And so you think the law should try to shape and form good attitudes?
I think the law should not be discriminatory.
I think it's a very slippery slope what you're saying, because you say that, well, appearance is linked to age, but also like the capability to perform your job is linked to age. So should we like keep someone who's like 100 years old and can no longer serve in the airline just because there's like...
That's capability. That's a whole separate issue.
But it's linked
this
with
is
age,
just attraction.
Though.
We're just talking about attraction.
Both of them are linked with age, though. Both of them are linked with age.
There's a difference between measuring somebody based on their age because they can no longer perform a job and measuring somebody because they look old. I mean, that's a completely entirely different thing.
I think it's a fine line. I do think that people, in the end, have different assets, and everyone is going to end up at a different place.
We're saying if you're 6'5", absolutely drop dead gorgeous and weigh about 2 stone, then you can go and become a model. That's what we're saying. We're saying that some people aren't like that, and
so
they should be able to go and work as a secretary and not be judged on what they look like.
Pan Am said explicitly at the time that we're doing this because this is what our customers prefer, and it's what we're doing to meet the demand, as it were, and to generate more revenue, and I think that's a perfectly reasonable business proposition.
What the customers prefer. But suppose some customers have bad preferences.
I have no idea about how to evaluate preferences. I try not to make those judgments.
But in the case of the airlines, now Pan Am, I think, said our customers want women flight attendants because they're more reassuring and soothing. But there were other airlines that said, we want female flight attendants and attractive ones. We're going to dress them in hot pants, and they will provide, in effect, sexual titillation. Now, suppose they really did get more customers. Is it a legitimate customer preference to want a scantily clad flight attendant on a flight?
I might think it was an odd preference, and I might not like it myself, but I wouldn't make that judgment in terms of having the government come in and intervene and say, this is legitimate, this is not legitimate. In practice, a lot of people would be turned off by scantily clad flight attendants. I doubt that that would be the sort of typical market equilibrium, but I wouldn't be intervening in terms of these different characteristics and preferences.
But those airlines carried on with it until the law and the courts said they couldn't.
I think that there would be a lot of people who would say that is completely unacceptable, much in the way that they say, I am not going to Hooters. And there would be airlines where they would have a diverse mix, male, female, different ages, different body types.
And they would compete in the market, and you're confident that the one with the diverse hiring practice would prevail.
What we're debating here is really about free choice and free will. The question about freedom or choice is much broader than just as a customer. It's more about, as a citizen, can I get a job? Can I get a house? Can I get a credit card? And that's where the government policy, I think, is important.
So if we're talking about employment, then it's wrong for the airlines to say you have to be a certain shapely woman to apply.
There will be an opportunity for that person to work in another environment. I mean, I lived in this country when you didn't see blacks or Latinos or Asians advertising products 15, 20 years ago. Now, I mean, it's a very, very diverse space. It's changed very quickly. So I have every faith that, yes, businesses, they absolutely value the diverse customer.
Our society has been defined by a long history of discrimination based on gender. And so types of discrimination, what the constitutional lawyers call suspect classifications, seem to me to be much more problematic.
The airlines argued at the time, we need to hire women and attractive ones. Our job is to maximize revenue, to attract passengers, and our passengers like flying on flights with attractive women, and that's why women were getting the jobs here, and the men were excluded.
That's true, but it is still a judgment based on a suspect classification. The airlines also emphasize that the primary mission of a flight attendant is safety, and in the absence of evidence that men were able to provide support for safety as effectively as women, a decision to exclude men would seem to me to be a problematic one. So that would not be a case where I would see great merit in their position in a society that is committed to civil rights and is committed to respect for all individuals in the workplace.
You have to look at why the desire for the airline to hire attractive people exists.
Right.
It was mostly businessmen flying, and they wanted to be served by attractive women. Now, most of us understand why that's extremely problematic, and we've decided as a society that it's not okay for you to only want to be served by someone of a certain gender or somebody who looks that way. And to you, Alex, what you said about like people have differences, some of the differences that we have claimed in our society are entirely of our own creation. Gender norms and norms about beauty are culturally and socially constructed. They are not natural.
So you're saying that the consumer preference of the male businessmen who flew a lot in the 1960s to be served by an attractive woman, that desire was morally illegitimate, and the law should try to discourage morally illegitimate preferences and desires.
Correct.
Do you agree, Lindsay?
I think that law should be neutral and not be discriminatory. And for most of these cases that we've been talking about, the non-discriminatory solution was in markets, and this idea of liberal neutrality, which is that laws should not promote one moral code over another. In this case, I think that the policy itself set by the market is discriminatory, and the law should correct for that.
Nicole's point that societal views on gender have changed, and I would agree with that. If you only hired flight attendants based on their looks, that's going to be a poor decision because they're just not going to be able to perform their job. So in the end, in the long run, it will correct for itself.
But I think the reason that we now have different flight attendants, I think that's because we have more people flying. So the businesses have responded to consumer preferences, showing that it's not okay.
But they didn't need a law to do that.
Yes, they did. There were court cases that changed the law.
Sometimes there are changes in law that need to be made that are not profitable in markets, okay?
True.
Changing slavery was probably not profitable in the long run, but we deemed it to be immoral, and therefore we had a law that changed that. So I think sometimes you have to have a law which corrects for market discrimination, and in the case of flight attendants, I think that is important.
And it was the law that changed that. It was a court case that made that practice illegal. It's not a change in consumer preference.
Let's say that the Abercrombie & Fitch person who folds clothes and checks people out. What if their role was not only that, but also to be a model? To be a model of the clothes, of the brand?
And that's why I said, I think that's why we can perhaps let Abercrombie go on this.
And what if the
because
stewardess was also a model of the brand by being attractive?
is there any direct link between attractiveness and being able to fly through the sky to another destination? I don't think there is.
We were arguing earlier that in the 50s and 60s, flying on a plane was a luxury, and perhaps at that time, being an attractive stewardess was part of the product being sold. How is that different from having attractive clerks
in
check
this
you out?
particular case, hiring people with certain attractiveness is creating some kind of social norm and picture that is influencing the way we perceive ourselves and the way our children perceive themselves. And that is leading to serious social problems that include drugs addiction, alcoholism, and committing a suicide.
Eating disorders are
Eating
a huge
disorders.
So do you
All
think
of
we should
these
just
issues.
abolish modelling then? Do you think
I'm not
I
sure
don't
of
think you
that.
have to abolish modeling. I just think that a different range of bodies.
Yeah.
Why is there one type of body that
So
we
you
deem
want, like-
socially acceptable?
But in the case of, for example, the Abercrombie and Fitch model, the basis for their employment of the attractive person is because of the brand equity has real added value. If we're going to outlaw a company's ability to capitalize on brand equity, we're basically taking profits away from them.
Oh, the horror.
That doesn't bother you, Nicole.
No, it doesn't bother me.
But Josh said the point of a business is to make money, to make profits. And so shouldn't it be up to the business to decide what its essential purpose is, and therefore what qualifications, what merits are relevant?
I do not find profit alone to be a sufficient justification for discrimination.
What's wrong with that argument?
I do think it's hard for companies to completely eliminate looks from the category because that's what people see when they walk in the door.
What about, would you say the same about race?
No, I wouldn't.
Why?
I think that that's something different because race...
And it's enshrined in law, and it still happens implicitly.
I know that it still happens.
And the law is there for a reason, and we all think that there's a really good reason that it's there.
No, and I agree. I think the law is good, and I think it's great in this instance. But with regard to race, it's very easily quantifiable. With beauty, you can't legislate something that cannot be clearly defined.
Well, I don't
get into a
Why
gray
would you not
area.
legislate something because it's difficult?
No, I'm not shying away because it's difficult. I'm shying away because the law needs to be able to define a line.
If we got to compete chain and we see that all of their employees are sexy, attractive, and hot, there will be something wrong with you if you don't figure out that there is a pattern there. We shall have stores that are open for everybody and do not discriminate anybody based on how they look.
That's like saying let's have a shop that sells everything in the whole world
I'm not
for
saying that.
absolutely
I'm
everybody.
saying let's
That is
have-
absolutely potty.
You're misunderstanding. I said there is something wrong with a shop that only hires attractive people. I think hiring people should be based on qualifications, not appearances.
We have made a distinction
But I
between
think
modeling and sales.
But I think the distinction from modelling does include the stores. If I go into Abercrombie and I feel uncomfortable there, I'm not happy there, I just won't buy from there. However, if I want to fly to the other side of the world and I feel uncomfortable on all airplanes because everyone is small, I think that has more of a detrimental effect to me. I can still buy clothes elsewhere.
What will prevent all the rest of the clothing chains to follow this policy?
Demand, consumer demand.
That doesn't prevail. If we look at the Abercrombie example, there was huge public outroar for about a day and a half when all these absurd comments were made. But sales are fine, so I don't think the market will take care. I don't think consumer demand actually shifts that much.
Sometimes you have to say, like, no, we all agree that, like, there's something really unsavory about this, and it's not going to change unless something is done about it. Outrage hasn't worked. People still go there.
Plus, people are prevented from access to employment. There are people who are not getting jobs. In this case, it's not just about particular options for branding. It's about people who aren't getting jobs in the service sector, which is the fastest growing sector in our economy.